This content is for educational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any disease. Always consult a qualified healthcare professional before starting any new health regimen. Every year, millions of people kill their houseplants and quietly give up. They blame themselves, their brown thumbs, their forgetfulness, their dark apartments. But the problem was never them. The problem was that nobody told them the truth, that a significant portion of the plant kingdom evolved specifically to thrive without direct sunlight. In fact, some of the most powerful, most useful, most beautiful plants on Earth grew on rainforest floors where sunlight never reaches, in medieval monastery corridors, in the darkest corners of ancient homes. Darkness wasn't their enemy, it was their home. So today, we're going through 20 plants that don't just tolerate low light, they genuinely prefer it. Plants that ancestors relied on for food, medicine, and air quality long before fluorescent grow lights existed. Whether you live in a basement apartment, a north-facing room, or a house where the windows are small and the shadows are long, these plants were made for you. Let's get into it. Let's start with the plant that practically laughs at neglect and has been doing it for centuries. The snake plant, known botanically as Dracaena trifasciata and still commonly called by its old name, Sansevieria, is arguably the toughest plant ever adapted to the indoors. In West Africa, where this plant originates, it was used for centuries to make fiber and was considered a protective plant, hung near doorways to ward off negative energy and placed in homes as a symbol of endurance. That symbolism turns out to be scientifically apt. NASA's famous clean air study found that snake plants are among the most effective indoor plants for removing toxins like benzene, formaldehyde, and trichloroethylene from indoor air. What makes it genuinely remarkable is its KM photosynthesis, a process where, unlike most plants, it absorbs carbon dioxide at night and releases oxygen, making it one of the few plants actually recommended for bedrooms. It can go weeks without water. It will grow in a room with no windows as long as there's some ambient light from lamps or hallways. You can find it at literally any nursery or garden center for a few dollars, and it will outlive most of your furniture. Start with a 4-inch pot in any corner of your home, water it every 2 to 3 weeks, and watch it thrive. From Africa, let's travel to the dense woodlands of Japan and China, where the cast iron plant earned a name that requires zero explanation. Aspidistra elature has been cultivated in Japanese homes since the Edo period, that's the 1600s, and it became wildly fashionable in Victorian England when having a plant that could survive coal-heated, smoke-filled parlors was essentially a social status symbol. The Victorians weren't wrong. Cast iron plants can tolerate near-total darkness, temperature swings, irregular watering, dust, and neglect that would kill almost anything else. They grow slowly, which means they stay manageable, and their wide, arching, dark green leaves create a genuinely elegant presence in any dim corner. They don't produce flashy flowers, but they reward patience with extraordinary longevity. Some cast iron plants in Japanese gardens are known to be over 100 years old. Place one in a pot with well-draining soil, water it once every 3 weeks, and simply leave it alone. That's genuinely all it asks. The ZZ plant, Zamioculcas zamiifolia, looks like it was designed by someone who wanted to prove that nature could make something both beautiful and nearly indestructible. Native to the dry grasslands and forests of eastern Africa, this plant evolved to store water in its thick, potato-like rhizomes underground, which means it can go a month or more without water and barely notice. In its native environment, it grew in filtered shade under the canopy of larger trees, which is exactly why it performs so well in the dim interiors of modern homes and offices. Interior designers have caught on. You'll spot ZZ plants in hotel lobbies, corporate offices, and airports worldwide, not just because they look polished and modern, but because they genuinely don't need maintenance. Research published in the journal Hort Science has shown that ZZ plants can grow under fluorescent lighting as low as 25-foot candles. That's dimmer than most hallways. They're also incredibly effective at removing airborne pollutants. The only real caveat: all parts of the ZZ plant are toxic if ingested, so keep it away from curious pets and small children. Other than that, it's one of the most forgiving, handsome plants you can own. Peace lily is the one plant on this list that actually flowers in low light, which is extraordinary when you stop to think about it. Spathiphyllum, as it's formally known, is native to the tropical rainforests of Central and South America, where it evolved to bloom on the dim forest floor, getting by on as little as 1% of full sunlight. Indigenous communities in its native range used it in traditional practices, and it became one of the first tropical plants widely cultivated indoors in Europe after its introduction in the late 1800s. Its white hood-shaped blooms are actually a modified leaf called a spathe, not a true flower petal, and they appear even in low-light conditions, making it one of the most rewarding plants for dark spaces. The same NASA Clean Air study that validated the snake plant also highlighted peace lily as one of the top performers for removing ammonia, benzene, and mold spores from indoor air. It's also one of the few plants that visually tells you when it's thirsty. The leaves droop slightly, then perk right back up after watering. It's almost impossible to silently kill a peace lily. Keep it away from direct sunlight, water it when the soil feels dry an inch down, and it will reward you with blooms 2 or 3 times a year. Pothos, Epipremnum aureum, is the plant that has probably kept more people from giving up on plants entirely than any other species in existence. You know this one? It's the trailing vine with heart-shaped leaves in shades of green, yellow, and marble. But what you might not know is that it's classified as one of the most invasive plants on Earth in tropical environments, which tells you something profound about its survival instincts. In its native Polynesia and Southeast Asia, pothos climbs jungle trees and carpets the ground in deep shade. Studies at Naresuan University in Thailand have documented pothos growing under light conditions equivalent to a room with no windows and only a single lamp. It still grows. It still trails. It still photosynthesizes. Ancient Polynesian communities recognized it as a plant of persistence and resilience, and some traditional healers used its crushed leaves topically, though it should be noted that pothos contains calcium oxalate crystals and is toxic if eaten by humans or animals. Hang it in a basket, trail it across a shelf, or let it climb a small pole. It adapts to every situation, asks almost nothing, and produces new leaves consistently even in the darkest rooms you own. Before we go further, I want to make sure you're catching something important here. Every single one of these plants was used, cultivated, or revered by people who lived without electricity, without grow lights, without the luxury of choosing their environment. These weren't decorative afterthoughts. They were functional, meaningful, sometimes sacred parts of daily life. The knowledge of how to work with what you have, to grow food, clean air, and medicine in imperfect conditions. That's ancestral wisdom that's more relevant right now than it's ever been. Keep watching because we're only getting started, and the plants coming up are genuinely going to surprise you. Now we start getting into territory that most plant guides completely skip over. The species with stories attached to them, the ones that grew in the shaws, dows of history as much as the shadows of your home. Dracaena, sometimes called corn plant or ribbon plant depending on the variety, is a genus that has been woven into African spiritual traditions for thousands of years. In parts of West and Central Africa, certain Dracaena species were planted at the entrances of sacred spaces. Their thick canes and strappy leaves were seen as markers of protection and permanence. Early European traders were fascinated by the large tree-like specimens they found and brought them back to continental greenhouses in the 1800s. What those traders had unknowingly imported was one of the most air-cleaning, low-light tolerant large plants in existence. Dracaena marginata, the red-edged variety, and Dracaena fragrans, the classic corn plant, have both been validated in multiple studies as effective removers of indoor volatile organic compounds. They grow slowly, prefer indirect light, and will adapt to conditions so dim they'd challenge other species. Water them sparingly, miss the leaves occasionally, and avoid fluoride-heavy tap water. They're sensitive to it. Use filtered or rainwater when you can. Chinese evergreen, Aglaonema, is the plant that professional interior landscapers quietly rely on more than almost any other. It's been cultivated in China and Southeast Asia for centuries, appearing in traditional homes as a symbol of good fortune and long life. Chinese evergreen comes in dozens of varieties: deep green, silver-streaked, red-tinted, pink-splashed, and the darker-leaved varieties in particular are built for low light. The rule of thumb from experienced growers: the darker and more solid green the leaves, the less light it needs. Aglaonema has been studied extensively in both NASA's plant research and in subsequent independent studies, consistently showing strong performance at removing airborne formaldehyde and benzene. It's also a famously slow-growing plant, which means it stays exactly where you put it and never gets out of hand. The only thing to know, it contains calcium oxalate, so keep it away from pets. Otherwise, it's one of the most carefree, beautiful, and genuinely functional plants you can put in a dark corner. Philodendron is a massive plant family, hundreds of species, and nearly all of them evolved on rainforest floors, which means they've been selecting for low-light performance for millions of years. The heartleaf philodendron in particular, Philodendron heterachum, is one of the most shade-tolerant vining plants available. Native peoples of Central and South America used philodendron species in traditional medicine, particularly for skin conditions and inflammation, though it's important to note that ingesting philodendron is toxic due to calcium oxalate crystals. What matters for our purposes is that this plant will grow in conditions where other houseplants simply stop. A north-facing room, a hallway, an office without windows, heartleaf philodendron adapts and continues producing its glossy, elegant leaves on trailing stems that can reach several feet long. Hang it, let it trail from a shelf, or train it to climb. It doesn't care. Water when the palm was out. Top inch of soil is dry, and that's genuinely all the management it requires. Bird's nest fern, Asplenium nidus, takes us into one of the most ancient plant lineages on Earth. Ferns predate flowering plants by hundreds of millions of years, and this particular species has been growing in the filtered shade of tropical forest floors and tree crevices across Asia, Australia, and East Africa for just as long. In traditional Japanese gardening, ferns represent resilience and the beauty of impermanence. The Japanese aesthetic concept of wabi-sabi finds its plant expression in the quiet, subtle beauty of fern fronds uncurling in dim spaces. Bird's nest fern is one of the few ferns that genuinely tolerates low light without deteriorating. Its wide, flat, bright green fronds collect every available photon, a design that nature refined over millions of years of forest floor living. It prefers humidity, so a bathroom with a small window or even just ambient humidity from showers works beautifully. Mist it regularly, keep the center nest, where new fronds emerge, free of standing water, and it will produce steady new growth even in rooms that see almost no direct light. Spider plant, Chlorophytum comosum, is perhaps the most forgiving plant in the entire history of houseplant cultivation, which is exactly why it became a symbol of community sharing. In South Africa, where it originates, spider plants grow wild in the ground beneath trees and rock outcroppings, naturally shade-adapted. But here's what most people don't know about spider plants' cultural history. During the 1970s, when apartment living expanded dramatically in American cities, spider plants spread from home to home through cuttings shared between neighbors, friends, and family. Before the internet, before plant swap apps, the spider plant was how people practiced botanical generosity, snipping off the dangling baby spiders and rooting them in glasses of water on kitchen windowsills, then passing them along. That tradition is still alive. Spider plants thrive in indirect light and low-light conditions, consistently making the shortlist in air quality research for their ability to absorb airborne compounds. They're completely non-toxic to cats and dogs, rare among houseplants, which makes them one of the only safe choices for pet-heavy households. Grow them in hanging baskets, let the baby plantlets trail down, and when someone admires yours, cut them a piece. That's how this plant was always meant to be shared. Here's something that's worth pausing on for just a second. Throughout most of human history, people didn't choose their plants based on aesthetics first. They chose them based on function, air quality, medicine, food, fiber. And the plants that survived in the corners and corridors of stone buildings, clay huts, and candlelit rooms were selected not by horticulturalists, but by life itself. The plants that persisted in darkness were the ones people depended on. That's not a coincidence. That's thousands of years of unintentional but incredibly effective reading and selection. What we're talking about today isn't a trend. It's a return. This next group is where things get genuinely exciting. Because these plants don't just survive darkness, they actually produce something useful. Mint is not typically what people think of as a low-light plant, But peppermint and spearmint, Mentha piperita and Mentha spicata, are among the most shade-tolerant herbs you can grow indoors, and their usefulness is hard to overstate. Mint has been cultivated for medicinal and culinary purposes for at least 3,000 years. Ancient Egyptians dried it and used it in burial preparations. Greek physicians recommended it for digestion. Medieval European monasteries grew entire mint gardens in the cool, often low-light conditions of enclosed courtyards and cloisters. Studies suggest that peppermint may help support digestive comfort, and compounds like menthol have been well documented for their cooling, soothing properties. Growing mint indoors requires keeping it in a pot. It spreads aggressively when planted in open ground, and it appreciates consistent moisture and temperatures above 50 degrees. A window ledge with ambient light is ideal, but it will also manage under a desk lamp or in a room that gets a few hours of indirect light daily. Harvest regularly by pinching the top leaves, and it will produce continuously for months. Lemon balm, Melissa officinalis, is a plant with one of the most storied medicinal histories in the Western herbal tradition. Used by physicians in ancient Greece, beloved by Arab scholars in the medieval period, and recommended by the famous 17th-century herbalist Nicholas Culpeper for what he called melancholy and dejection of spirit, lemon balm is now the subject of serious modern research. Studies suggest it may help support relaxation and healthy sleep, and it contains a compound called rosmarinic acid that researchers have studied for its potential calming effects on the nervous system. What makes it practical for this list is its adaptability. Lemon balm grows in partial shade in its native habitat across the Mediterranean and Central Asia, and it will produce usable leaves under low-light indoor conditions. It prefers slightly moist soil and doesn't like to fully dry out. Harvest leaves before flowering for the most potent flavor and dry them for tea that your ancestors would have recognized immediately as a household staple. Aloe vera is so commonly known that it risks being overlooked in a list like this. Don't make that mistake. Aloe has been used medicinally for over 6,000 years. Records of its use appear in ancient Sumerian tablets, in the Egyptian Ebers papyrus dating to 1550 BC, and in the writings of Greek physician Dioscorides. It spread along ancient trade routes specifically because it was so easy to transport and grow, and because virtually every culture that encountered it recognized its usefulness almost immediately. The gel inside its leaves has been studied extensively for its effects on skin health. Research suggests it may support the healing of minor burns and skin irritation, and it's been validated in multiple clinical studies for topic. Aloe. Aloe is typically considered a sun-loving plant, but it will actually adapt to lower light conditions as long as it gets some ambient brightness, an east-facing window, a room with indirect light, or a spot near a lamp. The trade-off is that it may grow more slowly and its leaves may stretch slightly. Water it deeply and then let the soil dry out completely before watering again. It stores water in those thick leaves and genuinely dislikes being kept wet. Ginger, Zingiber officinale, is one of the most medically studied plants on earth, and very few people realize it can be grown indoors in low light. Ginger is a tropical plant that naturally grows in filtered shade under forest canopy across South and Southeast Asia, which is precisely why it adapts so well to dim indoor environments. Its medicinal history is ancient and global. It was a prized commodity on the spice routes of the ancient world, used in Ayurvedic medicine for thousands of years, documented in Chinese medical texts dating back to 500 BC, and embraced by European physicians during the Middle Ages as a remedy for nausea, digestion, and circulation. Modern research has confirmed significant anti-inflammatory properties associated with ginger's active compounds, particularly gingerols and shogaols. Studies suggest it may help support digestive health and reduce nausea. To grow it indoors, buy a fresh organic ginger rhizome from a grocery store. Non-organic ginger may be treated with growth inhibitors and plant it in a wide, shallow pot with the knobby buds facing upward just below the soil surface. Keep the soil moist, place it in a warm room away from cold drafts, and within a few weeks, you'll have leafy shoots. In 6 to 8 months, you can harvest a portion of the rhizome while leaving the rest to continue growing. Turmeric, Curcuma longa belongs right beside ginger because the two plants are botanical cousins, grow in near-identical conditions, and have parallel histories of use that span thousands of years. Turmeric has been central to Ayurvedic medicine for at least 4,000 years. In Hindu tradition, it's considered a purifying and sacred substance. It spread through the ancient spice trade and eventually became a staple of traditional medicine in the Arab world, South Asia, and East Africa. The primary active compound, curcumin, has been studied in thousands of scientific papers. Research suggests it may support joint comfort, help modulate inflammatory responses, and support cellular health, though it's worth noting that curcumin absorption is significantly enhanced when consumed with black pepper and a source of fat. Grow turmeric exactly like ginger. Buy organic rhizomes, plant them in warm, moist, well-draining soil. Keep them in a warm room with indirect light and harvest after several months. Together, a ginger and turmeric pot is one of the most productive and historically resonant things you can grow in a dark corner of your kitchen. We're finishing strong with 3 plants that will make your plant-loving friends stop and stare. Because these are the ones most people have never heard of, and each one carries a story worth knowing. Parlour palm, Chamaedorea elegans, became famous in Victorian England for the exact reason we're talking about today. During the 1800s, wealthy Victorian households were heated with coal fires and gas lamps that produced toxic air and minimal natural light. Houseplants that could survive these conditions became status symbols, and parlor palm was one of the most prized. It was imported from the rainforests of southern Mexico and Guatemala, where it grows in dense shade on the forest floor, rarely seeing direct light at all. Victorian parlors weren't just named after this palm. In many cases, the palm was there because the parlor was the only room with enough residual heat to keep a tropical plant alive through an English winter. Modern research has validated the parlor palm's air-purifying abilities, particularly its documented effectiveness at removing formaldehyde. It's also one of the few indoor palms that's completely non-toxic to cats and dogs. It grows slowly to about 4 feet tall, prefers moist soil but tolerates drying out between waterings, and asks only that you keep it away from cold drafts and hot direct sun. It's elegant, historically layered, and genuinely effortless to keep. Calathea, now formally reclassified under the genus Goipertia, though most growers still call it Calathea, is known as the prayer plant family because its leaves fold upward at night like hands in prayer, responding to the circadian rhythm of light even in very dim conditions. Native to the tropical rainforests of South America, Calatheas grow exclusively on the forest floor where light levels can be extremely low. They've been cultivated in South American communities for generations, and their strikingly patterned leaves, zebra stripes, peacock designs, deep purple undersides make them unlike almost anything else in the plant world. The patterns aren't accidental. They evolved as camouflage on the forest floor and as a way to maximize light absorption across their wide, flat leaf surfaces. Calathea does have a reputation for being slightly fussier than the other plants on this list. It prefers humidity, dislikes fluoride and chlorine in tap water, and appreciates warmth. But if you use filtered or rainwater, keep it in a humid room like a bathroom, and avoid cold drafts, you'll find it remarkably rewarding. The nightly leaf movement alone will become something you look forward to. Our final plant is one that most people walk past without recognizing, but that deserves far more attention than it gets. Oxalis triangularis, sometimes called purple shamrock or false shamrock, is native to the subtropical regions of Brazil and has been cultivated as both an ornamental and a food plant for generations. Its triangular, deep purple leaves fold closed at night and open each morning, performing the same kind of circadian movement as Calathea. In Brazil, the young leaves and flowers are edible and have a pleasant, mild sourness due to oxalic acid, the same compound responsible for the tartness in sorrel and rhubarb. It grows from small bulbs, thrives in low light. Piscinaus refers cool temperatures and goes dormant for a few weeks once or twice a year, during which time it looks completely dead but is simply resting. Don't throw it away. Cut back the wilted foliage, reduce watering, wait 3 to 4 weeks, and then resume normal care. It will sprout fresh growth and look entirely renewed. That cycle of apparent death and rebirth is part of why oxalis has been used symbolically across multiple cultures. In Celtic tradition, the three-leafed clover shape was considered sacred, and the plant's resilience across seasons became a metaphor for continuity and return. It's one of the most unique, useful, and quietly extraordinary plants you can add to any low-light home. You don't need a greenhouse. You don't need southern-facing windows. You don't need expensive grow lights or a yard or a climate-controlled growing room. What you need is the knowledge that the right plants exist. Plants that were selected over thousands of years precisely because they could thrive in the imperfect conditions that most human beings actually live in. Every single plant on this list can be started for under $20. Most of them can be found at local nurseries, farmers markets, or ordered online. Several of them, the ginger, the turmeric, the mint, the lemon balm, will start giving you something useful within weeks of planting. And all of them carry histories that connect your modern home to ancient traditions of people who understood that the most powerful things in life often require the least dramatic conditions. Start with one. Give it the minimum it asks for. Watch what happens. Then start another. That's how every great home garden ever started. Not with a master plan, but with a single plant in a dark corner, quietly proving that life finds a way. If you found this useful, share it with someone who thinks they can't grow anything. They're exactly who this was made for. Subscribe if you want to keep going deeper into this world. We're just getting started. And drop a comment below telling me which plant you're going to try first. I read every single one.